What if the most important part of Samsung's latest One UI update isn't a feature you can immediately see? One UI 9 Beta 5 has arrived, and at first glance, it looks like another small bug-fixing update. But after looking deeper, there are several changes hiding underneath the surface that could tell us just how close Samsung is to the final version. And today, we're going to break down the new features, the hidden interface changes, the important bug fixes, and most importantly, whether this beta actually feels faster and more stable in everyday use. Welcome back to Tech Insights, and before watching, please do not forget to subscribe to our channel so that you can get notified about daily tech updates. One UI 9 is Samsung's Android 17-based software generation, and Samsung's original beta introduced changes across customization, accessibility, security, Samsung Notes, quick panel controls and several Galaxy AI-related experiences. But Beta 5 is a very different kind of update. Instead of trying to impress you with dozens of flashy features, Samsung appears to be concentrating on polishing the experience before the stable release. That might sound less exciting, but honestly, this is exactly the stage where an Android beta can become interesting. When Samsung stops adding major features and starts fixing the small things users notice every single day, it usually means the company is getting serious about stability. Let's start with the update itself. One UI 9 Beta 5 is roughly a 1.1 GB class download for Galaxy S26 series beta users, and the rollout has been reported in markets including the UK, South Korea and India, with other regions following their own schedules. The update also carries the August 2026 security patch. So, if you're looking at the download size and expecting a completely redesigned operating system, don't. This is not that kind of update. The real story is what Samsung is quietly cleaning up. One of the first things you may notice is that some of the smaller visual elements have been refined. For example, the Samsung Health widget has a slightly different, more transparent-looking background treatment. It sounds almost insignificant, but these are the kinds of changes that become noticeable when you compare Beta 5 directly with an earlier build using exactly the same wallpaper. Samsung is clearly continuing to tune the transparency and layering of One UI rather than simply changing colors for the sake of changing them. The Clock app also gets a subtle visual adjustment, with its background treatment moving away from the previous bluish appearance toward a different gradient that can appear warmer, with green and pink tones depending on the screen and theme. Again, this isn't the kind of feature Samsung will probably advertise as a headline improvement, but it contributes to the overall visual identity of One UI 9. And that is something we've been seeing throughout this beta cycle. Samsung is making dozens of small decisions that collectively change how polished the interface feels. Samsung Internet has also received a small interface refinement in the tab management area. When you open the tab switcher, access the additional menu and manage your windows, some of the menu elements now have a different background treatment that makes the options easier to distinguish. It's a small change, but it shows Samsung continuing to improve visual separation between controls, especially in areas where several options appear close together. Now let's talk about one of the changes that actually affects how One UI feels in your hands: quick panel behavior. One UI 9 already introduced a more customizable quick panel, allowing users to have greater control over controls and the sizing of elements such as brightness, sound and media. But the later beta builds have also been refining the animations and transitions. In Beta 5, tapping certain quick panel controls can feel more direct because instead of simply dismissing the panel and then opening the related settings screen, the transition can move more naturally into the relevant page. That sounds like a tiny difference, but these are exactly the micro interactions that determine whether an interface feels modern or slightly outdated. And here's another detail worth checking. When you enter the quick panel editing screen and choose to add controls, additional system-related options can appear. Among them are controls connected to security and privacy as well as accessibility functionality such as Select to Speak. These aren't revolutionary features by themselves, but putting them more directly into the control selection experience can make frequently used system functions easier to reach. Now we get to one of the more practical additions in Beta 5, warranty and care. This is the kind of feature that you might completely miss unless you actually open settings and explore the menus. Samsung has introduced a dedicated area designed to bring support, troubleshooting, diagnostics and repair-related options into one place. Instead of searching through multiple settings pages when something goes wrong with your phone, this section can guide you toward relevant troubleshooting information and support options. Inside this area, users can access details related to device problems, damage and repairs, performance concerns and general phone usage. You can also find troubleshooting information and frequently asked questions, while Samsung's support ecosystem can provide additional assistance. Depending on the device and region, support options can include contacting Samsung, requesting a repair and other service-related tools. This is especially useful because smartphone problems are often difficult to diagnose. You may know that something feels wrong, but you don't necessarily know whether the problem is software, hardware, a sensor or an individual app. And that brings us to one of the most useful parts, diagnostics. Samsung's diagnostic tools can test different components and sensors on the phone, allowing you to check whether hardware is behaving normally. Instead of manually testing everything yourself, the phone can walk through multiple checks and show progress as it goes. For anyone buying a used Galaxy, troubleshooting a strange problem, or simply wanting to verify that everything is working correctly, this could become one of those features you forget about until the day you desperately need it. But Beta 5 isn't just about adding menus. A huge part of the update is bug fixing, and this is where the release becomes much more interesting. Samsung's changelog focuses on issues that could directly affect daily usability. One of the fixes targets situations where parts of the settings app could freeze or display a white screen. That might sound minor until you imagine needing to change an important setting and suddenly being stuck looking at a blank interface. Samsung has also worked on an issue involving the camera widget on the lock screen. In affected situations, launching it could be slow or even result in a black screen. Since the lock screen camera is supposed to be one of the fastest ways to capture a moment, this kind of bug is particularly frustrating. Beta 5 aims to make that experience more reliable. The phone app has also received attention. Samsung has addressed an issue involving the bottom floating bar not appearing correctly in certain situations. This is another example of a problem that might not affect everyone, but when it does happen, it makes the operating system feel unfinished. Beta software is full of these little inconsistencies, and the fact that Samsung is now targeting them suggests the company is moving deeper into the polishing stage. There are also fixes involving My Files, where users could temporarily see a blank screen when entering the recent files list. Home screen behavior has been improved as well, including an issue involving certain shortcuts not being added correctly to the bottom area. Samsung has also worked on visual problems in the video and photo editing experiences, including preview alignment and flickering. Screen flickering in certain situations has received attention too. Connectivity is another important area. Beta 5 improves Wi-Fi related stability and addresses connection errors. And honestly, I would take a boring Wi-Fi fix over a flashy wallpaper feature any day. Software updates are ultimately judged by how reliably a phone performs basic tasks. If Wi-Fi stays connected, apps open correctly, the camera launches instantly, settings doesn't freeze and the interface stays smooth, that is what makes a phone feel premium. Now let's talk about the biggest question, performance. Does One UI 9 Beta 5 actually feel faster? The answer is more nuanced than simply saying yes or no. The Galaxy S26 Ultra already has extremely powerful hardware, with Samsung using the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 for Galaxy and a redesigned cooling system. Samsung says the S26 Ultra's customized processor delivers improvements across CPU, GPU and NPU performance, while the new vapor chamber provides a 21% improvement in thermal performance. That means the phone has plenty of hardware headroom, so the real test for One UI 9 is how consistently the software uses that power. During normal usage, the most important difference is not necessarily opening an app half a second faster. It is the consistency of animations, transitions and multitasking. When you pull down the quick panel, switch between apps, open the camera, return to the home screen and launch demanding applications repeatedly, you want the phone to behave predictably. Beta 5 feels much more like Samsung is working toward that consistency rather than experimenting with major interface changes. And that is why I would describe this release as a refinement update rather than a feature update. One UI 9 started with more visible changes, including expanded quick panel customization, Samsung notes improvements, accessibility enhancements and stronger security protections against suspicious applications. Beta 5 is taking those foundations and concentrating on making them dependable. There is another interesting clue here. Earlier One UI 9 beta releases were already becoming increasingly focused on optimization. Beta 4, for example, targeted issues involving quick panel performance, navigation behavior during games, live notification stability and other interface problems. So when you look at Beta 5 alongside those previous releases, you can see a pattern. Samsung is moving away from introducing major experimental changes and toward eliminating the little problems that could hurt the final experience. And if you are wondering whether you should install it, my answer depends entirely on what kind of user you are. If this is your main phone and you need absolute reliability every day, I would still remember that a beta is a beta. Even when a build feels stable, unexpected problems can appear. If you are already enrolled and comfortable with testing software, however, Beta 5 looks much more mature than the early One UI 9 releases. The improvements are not about giving you a completely different phone overnight, they are about removing friction. There is also a bigger question hanging over this entire release. Is Beta 5 getting close to the final One UI 9 experience? Samsung has not made every detail of the final rollout public, so we should avoid treating any beta build as a guaranteed final version. But the direction is obvious. One UI 9 is based on Android 17, and Samsung has been progressively refining the software throughout the beta cycle. At this point, stability matters more than adding another dozen experimental features. And this is what I find most interesting about One UI 9 Beta 5. If you only watch a quick feature list, you might come away thinking Samsung didn't change much. But if you actually use the phone, the story is different. The smoother transitions, refined interface elements, improved diagnostics, quick panel adjustments, security and privacy controls, connectivity improvements and bug fixes all add up to something much more important, a phone that feels less like beta software. Of course, there are still things I would like Samsung to improve before the stable release. I want even more consistency across Samsung's apps, smoother transitions in every part of the system, better optimization for battery life during heavy use, and absolutely no major regressions when the final version arrives. The last thing anyone wants is for Samsung to fix 10 bugs and accidentally introduce 5 new ones. So, after looking at One UI 9 Beta 5 from the feature side, the hidden tweak side and the performance side, I think this update is much more important than its relatively small list of headline changes suggests. It is not trying to reinvent One UI. Instead, Samsung is polishing the foundation, fixing the annoying problems and making the experience feel closer to something that can finally leave beta. And if you're using a Galaxy S26 Ultra, that is probably the biggest takeaway. The hardware is already incredibly powerful, so the next step isn't simply making the phone faster on a benchmark. It's making every interaction feel intentional, reliable and smooth. That is where One UI 9 Beta 5 appears to be heading. So, what do you think about One UI 9 Beta 5? Do you prefer Samsung focusing on stability and bug fixes, or would you rather see more new features added before the final release? And if you've already installed the beta, let me know whether your phone feels smoother, faster or more stable compared with the previous build. Drop your experience in the comments because those real-world reports can be just as interesting as the official changelog. This has been Tech Insights. If you enjoyed this deep dive into One UI 9 Beta 5, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next Galaxy update, hidden feature discovery or software review. There is still plenty to uncover before One UI 9 reaches its final form, and some of the most interesting changes may be the ones Samsung never puts in the headline. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.